Welcome again to the TPE Story Short for today. I will serve as kind of your host and moderator. My name is Brenda Ice, and I'm the Assistant Dean and Director of Campus Life at Scripps College in Southern California. My relationship and connections to TPE is that I currently serve as this year's Planning Committee Chair. And I am honored to be joined with another member of our committee who is new to TPE by way of our planning committee, but certainly not new to TPE based off experiences and our job search process, Christian Raphael. And so in a few minutes, I'm going to turn it over to him to share a bit about his story. Today's story short theme is really about recognizing all the various functional careers that exist in student affairs and when you decide to shift that function and still find passion in student affairs, but just take a different route. And so Christian will spend a few minutes kind of sharing his story. A bit of housekeeping in our Q&A. Feel free to ask any questions as he is relaying his story. We will create time for him to share his, and then the last 15 minutes or so will be devoted for you to pose any questions of him. I will monitor that Q&A and make sure that we can get all of your questions addressed. Without further ado, I want to turn it over to my dear colleague and friend, Christian.
Thank you so much for the introduction, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone in this space. My name is Christian Raphael. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I'm an assistant director at George Mason University's Housing Residence Life. And my role focuses on specifically assistant director for staff development, engagement, and onboarding. And that's a very long title just to say I help people do their jobs well and or help them to their next opportunity. So I'm excited to be in this space with everyone because I think this topic, COVID as a topic, has been existing for a long time, right? It's over 8 months for everyone in this space. But then also the idea of job searching and when are you finding opportunities that either give you passion, fulfillment, or that may be transitional. And I think COVID-19 has almost exacerbated that to an extent, right? As with COVID-19, people are facing unemployment, people are experiencing challenges, may that be socially, psychologically, or even with health. And so while yes, COVID has impacted a number of variables around us, I want to make sure everyone hears this is that you're never alone in this experience. You may feel very lonely, thinking about changing roles, finding a new job, quitting, resigning, and I'll talk about my story about me resigning, but you're never truly alone. And so if anything from this presentation, if you ever need a resource or if you ever need someone to talk to, I'm gonna throw in my contact information to help support you, or even just being a listening ear if I can do just that. To give a little bit of context of who I am in this space with this fake tree right here, my name is, again, Christian Raphael, and I'm a first-gen student. So my family is originally from the Dominican Republic, and my mother and father migrated to the Bronx, New York, go Yankees. And that's where I grew up for most of my life, was in the Bronx, New York. And it was interesting because I was always surrounded by people and individuals who looked like me, Latinx individuals. It was until I moved to Grand Rapids, Michigan, and went to Michigan State, go Spartans, where I started seeing the importance of professional development and how creating networks and opportunities, whether it be in higher education and student affairs, or even within your own personal interests, mattered. So as in more relation to my journey within higher education, focusing more about this short story, I was given an opportunity to be a graduate assistant in Housing Residence Life. And I never worked in Housing Residence Life before, not even as an RA. And I opened it with open arms, and it just opened my whole experience to student affairs. The idea to help support people to be a voice for the voiceless or to amplify voices really spoke to me. And in this experience, and time and location always matters, I was given several opportunities to either move from different projects, but also be promoted. And while only working less than 5 years in my department, I was able to start as a GA, graduate assistant, and I'm now an assistant director. So I have to acknowledge my privilege in certain spaces that if it wasn't for that first offer as a graduate assistant, I don't think I would ever be a graduate assistant, a community director, and then an assistant director so quickly, in my opinion. Everything's going well, and depending on institutions, you may be going through a reorg or a restructuring. And my institution was kind of going through that, was going through a reorganization and restructuring of who we were fundamentally and with all our positions. And when you think of reorg, I get excited. I get excited and energized about change, but it's also a little nerve-wracking because you don't know what can happen next. So I was offered a position, which was live on as an assistant director working with residential communities. And I thought it was everything that I wanted. I was still able to supervise folks. I was able to supervise full-time folks and as well as graduate assistants. Live on, which was great because of the resources, didn't have to worry about utilities or rent. And I weirdly enough love duty. So it was a good opportunity for me to still support students in that capacity. And about 5 months in, things just weren't clicking. And when I mean things weren't clicking, I kind of lost interest and passion in what I was doing. And I think it was due to several variables happening around me. I'm a PhD candidate in sociology. And so if you can imagine managing buildings and managing staff and being a true res lifer, sometimes your work life interferes with your personal life. And I was allowing that to happen when it came to my PhD work. I was allowing the work to mean more than my actual degree. When it came to the day-to-day of my job, what I thought I would love and enjoy wasn't giving me fulfillment. And I think there's a difference from like, oh, I don't like what I do just because I hate it. And like, I'm good at what I do and I can see the importance of it, but it's not speaking to me. And I was with the latter of that. It wasn't speaking to me as much as I thought it would. A few weeks went by and I came to the realization that I was just unhappy with my work and I had to find a different opportunity. And before I even started looking for any opportunities, I asked myself these 3 questions. Is it my department? Is it my job? Or is it me? And so when you're thinking of job changing, whether that be within the field, within your department, always ask yourself, is your department at fault or at blame here? Is their philosophy, if their ethos, their processes not aligning with you as a person? Is it the job? Do you love what you're doing or do you not really enjoy what you're currently doing in your current role? Or is it you as a person, that your department and your job it's okay, but you personally have priorities that you need to focus to, may that be family, friends, in my case, my doctoral work. And I think after finding out a little bit more, after answering those questions, I realized I had to do a job change. And this was before COVID, so I would never forget this day. It was December 14th. I went to speak to my chief housing officer and handed in my resignation. And at first they thought I was joking. And I at one moment thought maybe I'm going crazy. Maybe this is not what I should be doing. But giving my resignation was probably one of the most powerful things I ever did in my career in higher education, because it indicated 2 things. It indicated, one, I was serious about switching jobs and I was serious about finding a new opportunity for myself, but it also helped me reclaim my voice. And what I mean by that is when you're working in student affairs, with what I shared earlier, we're oftentimes working so hard to be the voice for others, the megaphone, the amp to help make sure that people are being heard, that we sometimes forget in our everyday roles and our everyday job functions. What is our voice? What are the things that speak to us? What are the things that we will feel comfortable doing in our roles and what won't we feel comfortable doing in our roles? Where are we willing to compromise? And so I share all that because when it comes to the job search process, I think it's understanding that one, it's about taking risk. It's understanding what you're willing to compromise for. Are you willing to change geographical locations, especially with a pandemic happening right now? But moving all those variables aside, maybe geographical location, what you're willing to do, what you're willing not to do in a job description, it ultimately comes back to you as a person in terms of, does a department speak to your values and to your ethics? The job that you're applying for, is it for purpose? So are you going to find energy and momentum in what you're doing? Or is it for transition that for right now, you're going to apply for an opportunity and you'll stick with it for a few months to find what will give you purpose? Or is it you as a person that you, when looking at this job that you're applying to, that you're either excited about it because it speaks to where you want to go professionally, and or that it's a blend of all three of those things. And so it's connecting this back to the story short, what I encourage everyone to do is ask yourself those three questions about, is it your department, is it your job, and is it you, or maybe a blend of all three of those things, and start identifying those variables that are important to you. What are you willing to do? What are you willing not to do? What will give you fulfillment? What won't give you fulfillment? Are you seeking for a transition? Are you seeking for a purpose? And I think once you have that understanding, you can navigate the job search process with intentionality. And it takes some time, it takes a minute, right? If you submit your resume and an application today, you won't hear back tomorrow, but it all begins. And that first step is asking those questions.
Thank you, Christian. I'm wondering, you talked about, asking yourself those three questions. Can you maybe expand on that a little bit and talk about your process in answering those? And in particular, how can someone impartially assess when it's the department, the job, or even themselves in kind of thinking through this? Because it's very easy to blame everybody else. And so when do you have that kind of introspection? So if you want to maybe elaborate on your process through that.
Absolutely. I for my process, and this could be the doctoral student speaking, the doctoral researcher, I try to remain, to the best of my ability, unbiased. And it's hard because we all have biases, right? I'm first gen, I'm Dominican, and I care deeply about low socioeconomic students. But when we're looking at the workplace, I think it's important to truly be reflective in terms of those three buckets. So when you're looking at your department, maybe departmental change, a new structure, reorganization, its philosophy, its ethos, you need to be extremely specific when evaluating that and identifying what doesn't align. Me just saying, oh, it's my department, really doesn't hold any weight until I can point out, well, my department in its mission and its statement, and even in its actions, has shown this. This is where we'll have to disagree. Similar with the job, right? There might be parts of your job description that you're like, oh, I love doing. Like, I love creating onboarding manuals. I love working with graduates. I may not like working with full-time professional staff. That's okay to acknowledge that. But then I think a deeper question arises is, okay, if you are liking only certain parts of your job, why is that? And going deeper to understand those reasons. And it's when you start understanding the why, I feel like you hear that in a lot of conversations, right? What's the why? Once you start going deeper into the thought process of why is this happening and why might be these different areas and different buckets that are impacting your need to do a job change, I think then you can really start looking for what can give you fulfillment or what could be transitional in your job search.
So one of you talked about, how empowering it was to walk into your supervisor's space and submit your letter of resignation. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask on behalf of the group, what's the rest of the story? Like, what happened after the resignation was submitted? And, how did that, just tell us that. Tell us the rest of the story.
Yeah. For full transparency, it took weeks to write that resignation letter. It didn't happen one day. I'm like, oh, I'm done. Here's the resignation letter. I had to reflect. And I also, I spoke to my family. I spoke to my mom. She is an immigrant. and she never quit a job in her whole life. So here I am as the first son saying, hey, mom, I'm about to quit my job. But I needed to know what was her support in my decision. And so once I had the personal understood, right? So advice from my friends, I made sure I had my savings. To be fully transparent, I had 10 grand saved for this transitional move to live back at home with my mom. I gave my resignation letter, and what occurred in that space was, and I appreciate my chief housing officer and my supervisor, because they were wondering what went wrong. How did we have someone so positive and so ready for this change that in less than 8 months was willing to resign? And we had to have 6 meetings. We'll never forget them. 6 meetings about what was the next steps to ensure that I stayed, and or what we could do differently as an institution and department. And I recognize my privilege in that space. Not many people will ask you to stay after you give them a resignation letter. And so the end of the story is, after I spoke to my skills, my talents, what I wanted to do, I was thankful enough to have a position created for me that spoke to the need for the department. And I'm still here.
All right, we do have a question from the audience, and so if you could share with us, how would you advise someone to look for a new role within their department or institution without telling people, out of fear that they may risk their current status within their job?
Yeah, that's I think something many folks fear, right? How do I job search within the institution or within a current role without being judged by peers or outside variables? And so the first thing I would say is, you have to do what you feel comfortable with, right? I haven't told many people till this day, until I'm on this call, that I actually resigned from my role. And so the first thing is comfortability. What do you feel comfortable sharing, and what do you feel comfortable not sharing? And once you have a better understanding of that, if you feel like sharing with close colleagues and peers that you're on this job search process or applying for an internal position, awesome, I empower you to do so. But no one needs to know your business besides you, and maybe HR if you want to talk to HR ever. And so what I would encourage is, one, do what you feel comfortable with. Two, if there's a position out there that you're interested in, definitely apply, and make sure you're reading that job description and getting all the context to that. And then two, if anyone does ask any questions, so let's say they see you on an email that says person X is presenting for this as part of this role interview, again, do what you feel comfortable with. If your team is wondering why you applied for that, share with them why you want to share. But if you don't, then you don't. It's a privilege, not a right, to understand people's experiences. And I think sometimes in the workplace, we forget that.
I'm also curious if, you talked about this idea of you knew it wasn't clicking for you. And far too often, I think in our profession, we're told to do the time, that you have to stay in a role so many years before, people will look at you again for another role. So might you be able to impart some wisdom about this this reality, I think, that exists, that says 3 years, then another 2, and then another before you move up in the ranks, to, in your experience, kind of trusting your gut and not staying that entire time, that entire period that's often recommended. What words of wisdom or advice might you be able to share with the folks today and or that will see this later?
Absolutely. And you're so right. The time on the resume, if it's a year, 2 years, or 3 years, people wonder about that, right? And what I would tell someone is, no one's going to know your story better than you do, right? And so if you're in a position that it's not clicking, and that means, again, everything I said, if it's the department, it's the job, it may be you, and you need to do a change, when you are ready to go to your next opportunity, again, you will need to feel comfortable to an extent to share why that change occurred, right? They may ask you in an interview if they're allowed to, but what I would say is, no one knows your story better than they do. And just like how I'm sharing this story, I realized I didn't want to be on call. I realized that the responsibilities were not aligning with me personally and what I wanted to do. And that's why I needed to do a change after my first year. That is my story, my narrative. And that's what I tell people. And so once you have a better sense of what's causing the shift, what's causing you to change roles, that is your story. And sticking with your story and being consistent is important. So if you're applying for a job and if you're worried about, well, I've only been in this role for a year or I've only been in this role for 3 months, still apply. And if there's any serious concerns or any reservations, you would know through the interview process. But if you're invited, that means they see potential in you. So let the action speak louder than that fear.
You talked about as you were doing kind of this soul searching and thinking about if it was right for you. You alluded to talking out to your family, but what other resources did you tap into, or resources that you might recommend to this group that they should consider when trying to evaluate the bigger picture about, is it time, and when it's time, and who do I share this information with?
Yeah, great question. When it comes to resources, I break it down. I break everything down into buckets. It's because I'm an arranger. But I think of the social, right? So who are the friends and family members that I should let them know I'm doing this transition? Almost like my lifelines, right? I knew that if I didn't have a job, I was gonna lose my live-on apartment. I need to go somewhere. So I was like, Mom, I'm about to make this life change. Can I move back home? So understanding your lifelines and who can help you during transitional moments. But then also, when I did get a new opportunity, I looked at everything from affordable housing. So DC has a great program, depending on your salary income, that you can sign up for affordable housing. And I would encourage, if you fall in that bracket, to maximize that resource. It might take some time, but that's a resource that you have a right to. Saving, right? So there's a moment from not paying utilities, and this is from my live on experience, but going from a space where no rent, no Wi-Fi to utilities to now living in a location where you have to worry about all that stuff, it comes back to financing and budgeting. So when you are thinking about career changes, pre and post, make sure you have a good balance of your budget and your finances. And then lastly, make sure you're speaking to someone, right? You're doing a change in your life. And we can simplify and just say, oh, it's just a transition. Oh, it's just a job change. But that is a change to your life. And you may need to physically move. You may need to, send in a resignation, and that's all in relation to transition. So just make sure you're speaking to someone if you need those resources.
And I think this will probably conclude our question asking. There may be another one that pops up, but we've talked a lot about kind of this personal assessment. But if you could maybe talk about how someone would acquire skills when applying for jobs that move them from a different functional area. So for example, I spend most of my career in res life, but now I know I want to move to another location within student affairs. What type of skill building or advice might you share with them to make sure that they can collect the additional skills needed to truly make that leap from one area to another in student affairs?
That's a great question. What I would do is, if you can, I would go to LinkedIn, the TPE job posting site, and see what jobs speak to you. If you want to do like a move, see what job postings are similar to that internal move you want to make. So I was in Res Life and I wanted to do staff development and learning. Look at what are the things I'm missing, right? I have this process where I color code things. So in the job description, I would highlight green that, yes, I have these skill sets. Yes, I've done training. Yes, I've done recruitment. Yes, I've done onboarding. Have I done facilitation? Maybe not. Have I done X? Maybe not. And find ways either on your campus or even on national committees like TPE, NASPA, ACPA that you can join to gain those skills, right? It's one thing to not have access to those skills, right? So if your current position isn't allowing you to grow for another position that you're interested in, but then how do you find opportunities that can help you build those skills, right? So like this TPE experience is helping me with candidate development. It's everything from training to learning to recruitment, right? So find opportunities either on your campus, in your department, or at a larger scale that you can join committees and opportunities for to build those skill sets. And look at those job descriptions, see what people are hiring for, and build your skills towards that.
All right. Well, I think we're at time. Before I close out, I do want to give you the space to maybe close us out. You've done a fantastic job, and thank you for certainly sharing your personal story. But if you could wrap up all that you shared with us and maybe like a quick little synopsis, what would you like to leave the group with as it relates to transitioning to a different area and that kind of why question you started with?
Yeah, changing jobs, may that be within your institution or across the country to a different space, I think all begins with the question of why, right? What's sparking your interest to change? May that be your department, may that be your current job that you're not liking it or want to do something different, or something that's speaking to you or that's not clicking for you. Once you understand that why, then look into opportunities where you can build those skill sets that you're looking for. So only working in Res Life was a great opportunity, but I needed opportunities within staff development and learning that made me somewhat qualified to get this position. So ensure that you're looking for opportunities for you to build additional skill sets in the area that you're interested in. But most importantly, when we're looking at transitions, may that be resigning, may that be job switching, may that be going to a different institution, really identify socially, the people that can help support you, your lifelines, your family members, your friends, your partners, as well as think strategically and economically about finances. Always apply and never be fearful of a no.
Thank you. I like that. Never be fearful of the no. I want to thank all of you for attending today's story short. I do also want to take this opportunity to remind you of our workshop that's happening in this Thursday at 9:30 a.m. Eastern Time, which is the final workshop in our series in support of careers and student affairs in our Jumpstart initiative. So join us this Thursday as we talk about kind of the next steps. And so there was a sequential pattern to all of the information we provided this month. And this week's will be kind of the collection and culmination of all those conversations to help you further prepare for your job search and be able to leave you with a proposed timeline so that you can be a part of it. If you haven't registered, you can visit our website, theplacementexchange.org, to find that link and registration, or certainly reach back out to us at info@theplacementexchange.org. Thank you again for your time today. I wish you well with the rest of your day and the rest of your week, and hopefully we can see you on Thursday. Thank you again, Christian. Appreciate your time today. You all take care. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you for everything.